The future of work is shaped by the talent you hire today. Join us in Dallas, Texas, April 19th until the 22nd, to gain the tools and strategies to build a stronger, more resilient workforce at SHRM Talent 2026. Learn more at shrm.org/talent26-podcast.
Business leaders know the future is already here. The economy is shifting. Non-humans are entering the workforce. Nothing feels certain. SHRM understands those evolving challenges, both in the workplace and the wider world. In this podcast, we'll bring together authors, researchers, executives, and non-traditional experts to help you take on the challenges others haven't yet considered. Because you don't need to be a futurist, you need actionable insights now. You need to be a Tomorrowist. I'm Jerry Wan. Welcome to Tomorrowist, where we explore the trends shaping the future of work. We're recording live at the CEO Summit in Virginia, where we're sitting down with visionary business leaders who are redefining how we lead and navigate challenges in an increasingly complex world. Here to share his perspective is Jeffrey Hayzlett, chairman and founder of the C-Suite Network, a platform that connects and elevates top executives around the world. Jeffrey, welcome to Tomorrowist.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, we're recording this in the fourth quarter of 2025. There's certainly a lot of things going on, but I want to focus on communication between leaders and between their teams and sort of the things that you hear, both the things that you hear directly in your work, running this global network of C-suite executives, the media platforms that you've built, but also the things that we can learn as there's so much disruption, so much change, and then certainly so much uncertainty that drives the world. And so, let's start off with the top. What are some of the changes and the trends that you are observing amongst the C-suite when you talk to them, when you get on the phone or come to a conference like this? What are the first things that they bring up with you?
I hiking it back to, I was recently at an event with the New York Stock Exchange where I happen to have a show that I actually film on the New York Stock Exchange, but they had a partner event. And Len Martin, who's the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange and ICE, the parent company, talked about AI and what it's going to do. And I think AI is in everybody's nomenclature. I think mostly because we can spell it. That's one. But two, it is going to transform. And she talked about the market cap of the New York Stock Exchange being around $20 trillion today. And then having about 100 million people who are employed by those companies. Then she said 10 years from now, the market cap of the New York Stock Exchange is going to be at 80 trillion and only 20 million people. That's dramatic. Now, I might have those numbers off a little bit, but it was a real flip. And so I think a lot of companies are uncertain about what it's going to do, how it's going to go. And a lot of people can make promises and make predictions, but we don't know. But what we do know is that there's change going on. Even right now, as we're sitting here, the government's shut down, the president's laying off people, and then in between that are all these corporations and companies trying to operate in what they consider to be, some pretty tough employment laws and pretty tough things that they do. So there's a lot of all this stuff. So you really got to have a good sense of values of who you are, unless or you're going to go off the rails. And I think that's what most people. It's really tough. It's really tough.
Yeah. So when these changes happen and there's so much disruption, you have to be able to communicate effectively to your team, to your customers, to your shareholders, to yourselves, even in a way that balances the facts, the data, with nuance and storytelling, with emotion, right? And how has that changed, right? Because I feel like the exposure or the availability of executives have changed, right? Things like LinkedIn and social media, or even just the ways that we communicate. We dare not thought of texting somebody. It was a very informal thing to do, and now we do that with our bosses, or we do that with our peers. Slack is prevalent, or tools like Slack are prevalent in every organization. And so, safe to say that we have moved towards a more informal communication structure. But what are leaders thinking about in terms of navigating their own challenges while getting the story right, and to making sure that there's not, a big alarm or fear every corner, but to make sure that as they navigate these various challenges, that their teams are well informed, but also there's truth in the messaging and all these different concerns?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we learned during COVID, days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years. And so the speed of which this communication has to occur has to be much more frequent, has to be a regular drip. And if you're a C-level executive and you're communicating out to the team, you don't do it once a quarter. You have to do it on a regular basis. And we're finding that there's better mechanisms to be able to do that. And you're seeing a lot more CEOs go direct. Now, CEOs control the brand. Now, brand is typically, you would think, is the chief marketing officer's role, but really it's the CEO, because it's all about a promise delivered. It's not a logo. It's not, the colors that we have in our logos. It's all the things that are related to, the inception of idea all the way through customer satisfaction. So they own the brand. Right. And the biggest part of moving that brand is all around communicating where we're going and what we're doing with it. And the best person to do that is typically the CEO. And so having that CEO communicate on a regular basis, because most employees, I don't know what the figure is, but I think it's 58% don't know the values of the company. And if you don't know the values of the company, it's tough to get that, move from the bottom all the way up in the culture and everything that you need to do. So you've got to directly communicate. So, one of the mechanisms that you're going to see more is a little bit more audio, certainly a lot more video. I think video is going to play a bigger role in the way that we're going to communicate. Used to do it through town halls. When I was the chief marketing officer at Kodak, we'd have town halls and do the town halls around the country, and then we'd televise the town halls and do it like that. But it was a very structured kind of less than one-to-many communication, as opposed to, you're going to see a lot more one-on-one. But it's still one-to-many, but it's that personal connection. And I think you mentioned storytelling. Storytelling is becoming a big part of it. You have to be very transparent in your communication, and you have to be able to weave not a good story, but a story that's one, believable, and one that people want to follow and want to participate in order to move the needle in the company.
I mean, you're certainly right. In the old ways, let's call it, it was a one-way communication. Yeah. It was top down.
Yeah, typically it was a newsletter or an email or a letter, an actual letter at one point. So you probably don't remember that, but I remember those days.
I mean, and there was no way to effectively voice your concerns back, right? And it was sort of, we tell you and you listen. Right. And obviously, and I think culture has changed in addition to the technical tools.
Well, social media has caused a great deal of that. I mean, not only internally, but externally, certainly externally. As the chief marketing officer at Kodak, and I was spending $120 million a year in research. Well, when Twitter and everything came along, I realized very quickly we can get feedback from customers on products. Well, you can do a similar kind of thing. So as you mentioned, Slack and some other tools, where you can have a direct, email back to the CEO communication. So it's been very good.
And I think it's changed how executives and C-suite leaders also have to view themselves, right? And so I'm curious to get your take on the idea. So I'll ask a broad question. Should every executive today have a personal brand that they focus on, invest in? Because I think there is a growing trend and even pressure for every founder, certainly, because they need to be their personality and be their own chief marketing officer, but even executives to have a presence, certainly on LinkedIn, but in other places, not only to drive the awareness and the direction and the missions of the brand, but also for self-survival, right? They want people to be, want to be known.
Well, or what are you going to do after that?
That's what
because
I'm saying.
The average job of a CEO, when I was there at CMO of a Fortune 100 company, the average lifespan of a CMO was 18 months. So you better have
10 years shorter and shorter, because it's very much, what'd you do for me today?
Exactly.
Right, and so how do you view that? Are people investing in that? Are they learning the tools to have a better, they post better? You mentioned video. There's certainly executives and leaders not only advocating for things like podcasts internally, but starting their own show outside, starting newsletters. We're seeing that, and so these personalities in and outside of the organizations are building their own brands. Is that something that you're seeing, and how do you think that's going to change in the next few years?
Well, it's funny you should ask me, because back when I was working in the corporate world, 2008, 2010, Forbes magazine named me the celebrity CMO because of my personal brand, because of what I was doing. So yes, the answer is absolutely yes, if you want to be successful. So, if you see the company, you see the person. If you see the executive, you see the company. There is no differentiation in that. So there is some, and you can have some of that inside the company, but your first and primary role inside that company is to support the company, right? And to always make sure that your values, your messaging, everything that you do aligns with that brand. If it doesn't, then you're out of whack, all right? You're outside the scope of where it should be. And you certainly can have that. I remember my CEO coming to me and saying, Jeff, we want you to do this. We want you to be this person. We need a voice for the brand. And at the same time, don't go outside these,
right.
These bumpers. And that was a great message for me to understand, because that's my role, right?
Sure.
So if you, without question, you have to be a much more effective communicator. And if you don't have the communication skills, it's going to be very tough for you to be able to do your job.
Right.
And and I think about the HR world and what you have to do there. You've got to be some of the best communicators in the world, because you're dealing with most of the people on the front lines, right? So, but as a CEO, CMO, CFO, yes, you can't be in this ivory tower like you used to.
Right.
And we used to have those. Used to have the silos. Used to be and to some extent, some of the floors are locked off, stuff like that, because there's some for various reasons there are many unsafe people out there who try to get to certain people. So that occurs. But needless to say, you have to be able to develop that personal brand. And then, by the way, I think it's survival, especially for a C-suite executive, because if you don't stand out, you won't get noticed. If you don't have something people can go and look at your work of, your block of work, it's very difficult for them to pick you up later on and to see what you have done. So and I really believe, whether you're a founder of a company or any C-suite executive, you truly have to sell that brand and be that brand, and that's part of your persona.
Speaking to I don't want to say ambitious, but every leader, as we mentioned, it's almost a prerequisite to have at least some sort of presence on the internet, sharing your own point of view in addition to the messages of the organization you represent. What is the recommendation to the leaders that you speak to in balancing, as you mentioned, oftentimes leaders are handed press releases or talking points and saying, hey, you are fully a representative of XYZ company. But yet we know that people have their own personal networks. They have a life before that company.
Right.
Likely they'll have a life after that company. And so there is this personal desire and almost need to share your personal values, your own story. And so how do we balance that, right? And so, maybe you post something and you get a gentle Slack message from somebody in the company saying, hey, maybe you want to rethink that. I think those instances are getting fewer and fewer as the leash gets a little longer from companies, but how do you balance that?
I don't know if it gets fewer and fewer. I can remember I once, early on in Facebook, liked 3 young blonde women. And I had an employee go to HR and say, this does not look right. Well, those are my neighbor's kids. And so, and they're my godchildren. And that person didn't know it. So sometimes it can get viewed during
perception,
in terms of different classes. So the key thing is, are you on message, right? And you have to have a real good sense of the values inside that company. I can't stress this enough about what it is we're trying to do. And if you're outside the values, then you're probably going to get slapped around a little bit,
right.
and should, quite frankly, because you're living the brand, you're representing the brand, and so therefore, I used to say you need to drink the Kool-Aid, but my head of HR said maybe you should say drink the champagne, and which I understand, but that's been my test of marketing is will you drink that Kool-Aid? But you have to embody the values of the company. If you don't do that, now, can your personality be outside a little bit rambunctious? I've been known to do that. I've been known to use a few bad words, and then of course HR and communications come to me and say, Jeff, that's not appropriate. But to me, it's okay to have that kind of discourse. It's okay to have that kind of conversation, because that gets healthy debate, leads to a better position. And I think companies need to do more discussions around that. But you really have to think through what problem you're trying to solve, what are you trying to do, and everybody in the C-suite or anyone that's then acting or telling the story on behalf of the company has got to have that core piece of it down.
Another concern, I think, for not just executives, but people broadly is, we all have cell phones in our pockets, and almost everybody's recording every moment of everybody else's life. And, there was a famous story earlier in the year about 2 people at a concert who shouldn't have been there, and that became a work issue because they were colleagues, right? And so, and not to use that as the focal point, but how do we balance?
But it should be a work issue.
It was a work issue,
It
right?
should be a work issue. They were there at the capacity of work, and even when you're off, you're not.
Correct.
You're always on.
And so in today's day and age, and I would imagine that the ubiquitous of cell phones are going to even get more prevalent in our society, and cameras everywhere, and everything being recorded. How do we balance that? And do we get a chance to In the old times, it was leave your personal life at the door at 9 o'clock, right? And sort of like that TV show Severance. In a perfect world, you can sever your personal and we don't live in that world, and that Venn diagram is going to be a complete overlap, if not already.
I don't think we ever lived in that world. I think what you do at home affects what you do at work. What you do at work affects what you do at home.
But the companies would have liked to think that you don't bring that, right? And so...
Yeah, but again, it gets back to values. It gets back to the culture. It gets back to, who are we as a company and what we are. And listen, what you do in your private life is your private life. It's when you do take it public that becomes a problem. So, if you're gonna cheat on your spouse and you're going to do those things, then by gosh, don't do it at a football game. Don't do it at a basketball game. Don't do it, where other people can see that. Or maybe you should walk the talk and move on and do the things you need to do.
We mentioned, and we don't need to mention, but everybody who is listening in our audience is dealing with something, right? Being impacted by socioeconomic things, geopolitical things, the fear of job loss, the change that we are seeing. As you mentioned, we happen to be recording during a government shutdown. What are some key messages of advice to the leaders based on your conversations and your vast experience of helping communicate those challenging messages, balancing the care, but also business priority? When bad news is coming, how do you balance that? These are not, regardless of how much training you get, these are tough conversations to have. And as mentioned before, the method of communication is also changing, and so they feel almost a little bit more informal. Instead of having a one-on-one conversation, you might get an email. People have been fired over text. These are really tough things to do, and the tools are changing. And so what are some of the non-technical advice from a human perspective or from a storytelling comms perspective that you share?
So always imagine you're in that other person's shoes. I think that's the golden rule, right? Of how would you want to be treated? Would you want to get that text? Would you want to see that press release? And so one, it's always be transparent in the conversation. And so if you're being transparent, at least you have that going for you, right? Because there are tough things. I personally had to lead 8,500 layoffs at one point. Way back during the financial crisis. And that's not an easy thing to do because you're basically ruining people's lives. You didn't cause that, but you're trying to save the tens and tens of thousands or 100,000s of others that are working for you. So the best thing to do is always to be transparent and to do it as early as possible because I'd want to know that it's coming, right? But I'd also want to be treated as a good human being. And I'd want to be treated with some dignity. And I think some of the things that we see today from a public policy that's being carried out is not treating people with real dignity. And so we believe in the C-suite network of always putting people above profit. Because in the end, that's the one thing that differentiates us from everything else is the people. And the people that are working with us, the people that are in the company drinking the champagne with us and drinking the Kool-Aid, as I like to say, who really, truly believe in the company and the mission and the values and where we want to go. Well, I want to do my best to take care of those people. And I think most leaders are that way. I truly believe there's very few CEOs, very few chief HR officers who wake up and says, I can't wait to be stupid today, right? So what we have to do is just remember the core things of what we're trying to do and to treat everybody just like you'd want to be treated. And if we did that, things would go a lot better.
I think so.
But it's been the other things, and that's caused distrust. It's caused the discourse that we've had. And I think that's where at least the C-suite network, what we're trying to do is say, listen, you might not be the smartest person in the room. In fact, most C-suite leaders are not. But our job is to be the most strategic. And to live the values of the company and take care of those people as much as we take care of our customers that we serve.
You mentioned the topic of AI earlier. It's an easy acronym to spell. As you mentioned, it is having an impact on the ways that we communicate. In executive communication, there have been many instances of executives being found out that they simply copied and pasted a letter written by AI that was supposed to be very human.
Some companies, I just saw that it got paid $400,000 and it was an all AI document. So
we're now seeing the introduction and the improvement of video AI. And so when now we see a video, an interview perhaps like this a few years from now, we may not know if Jeff and Jerry were here in person or if it was just computer generated. It is. But it is coming, if not already here.
Oh, it's here.
And so how do we balance that trust, as you mentioned, the culture and the values of honest and personal communication, and also to make sure that we can build cultures of trust and cultures of authenticity, both from a personal and from an organizational perspective?
So one is good education, educate the people that are watching and listening. I mean, when you see a kid feeding an alligator or feeding a bear, that's probably an AI generated video. Where you see something that's coming through that someone's saying, it doesn't sound like that's really him or her, and it doesn't sound like that would come from him or her, like those things should trigger in our minds, so we should get educated about that.
Yeah.
The second thing is we're going to start to need some standards. We need, as I said, bumpers that need to be put around this so that we understand that we need to be human first in this AI community. And so it's just not caught up. It's moving faster than the ways in which we can put the bumpers around it to say, hey, here are some things we need to think about. Yeah. I'm very concerned as a C-suite executive that an AI version avatar be created of you or me or some other executive in the company, and they'll put out a video that's totally fabricated that will take the share of that stock from that company from here all the way to here overnight and basically bankrupt or ruin the company. I don't think we're far from that. So what we have to do as people is, and as media, is say, is that a reasonable thing to see or understand or that's happening right now, and should we be questioning? Absolutely. And so right now I think with most media, you should trust but verify. And it's important for us to do that. And so I do believe there are some companies, like there's a company called Emovid that's working on asynchronistic video, very good company. And they're working with various levels of labels. So you can tell when it's been AI enhanced. When I have communication, I use that tool all the time because it's a very effective tool, one-to-one or one-to-many. But yet you could turn that into an avatar that's camera ready when I'm maybe, in the bedroom in the morning doing my email, but I want to cut a great video and send it to somebody quickly because it's important. So you got to weigh all of those things. But the key is if it doesn't look real, it's not. And trust but verify. And then just use some common sense, get educated. But we also need to, as companies, saying, no, we're going to do it this way. This is how we're going to communicate. And then you're going to have to, the other piece of it is you're going to have to monitor like you've never monitored before to make sure that people know it's really you.
And then like you said, the way that things go viral, the way that things that, people share and react, and without any checks and balances, the damage could be already done by the time somebody gets wind of it, right?
I see clips from Elon Musk that I know it's not him talking about these things, about health supplements. Because Elon Musk is, and then you got to question, Elon Musk does not look like a health supplement kind of guy.
But if you track the sales data, they already sold plenty of it, right? Because
Totally.
People have
They've
fallen
used
for it.
They've used it, they've fallen for it, and so forth. So we have to do our best. And the same thing with politicians, the same thing with rock stars and everything else that everyone's going to be taken advantage of, and we have to do our best to protect everybody. Those receiving the information and those that are perceived to give the information. So
we've talked a lot about different communications, certainly from a digital perspective. So I want to close our conversation with a trend that I've been seeing, and I'm sure you've been seeing as well. We're here in person at the CEO Summit in Virginia. There's this need post-pandemic in this ever-present digital world for folks to come together in person, to shake a hand, to hug, to share a meal in person, and to make sure that these conversations are happening, as much as we can, face to face. What is the future, in your perspective, in the trends of in-person events coming back, not only internally? I know there's a lot of cost considerations and cuts and things going virtual. COVID habits are hard to break even for organizations who've established new budgets. But for conferences and for industry organizations, or even, we're seeing the rise of private memberships and communities and, just anything related to in-person gatherings. What are you seeing there? Are people clamoring for something more human, more authentic in-person experiences?
Oh, without question. In the C-Suite Network, we do over 600 meetings a year. Most of those are virtual. So we learned during COVID that virtual does work. We've learned that this video communication works. We learned that with cameras on, with them off, we've learned to kind of adjust to that. And we've also learned that work from home is working. And now some of us would prefer to have it the other way. Some of us prefer to have it one way. Those are different. Those are preferences inside the culture of the organizations, and they can decide if that's part of their culture and what they want to do, and that's the way they're going to do it. Now, some people will agree, and some people won't, and that it'll all settle down. But what we've seen is that the need for personal one-on-one or one-to-many to getting together, some might say press the flesh or belly rubbing kinds of events, so to speak, have always never gone away. It's just we got very complacent with the other, and now we're seeing the real need for them. So they'll find a balance. What that balance is it 50-50? I don't think so. I really don't. But I think where there's a high impact, a high need for return, you're going to see those face to face, but in a different way. You won't see them, it used to be an event like this, they would want to force everyone into the room and no one into the hallway. But we can hear you and I right now outside this room, there's hundreds and hundreds of people out in the hallway chatting and doing what they need to do. There's a real need for that. I think that's a human need. But more importantly, I know from business, as a CMO, a chief business development officer, as a CEO, chairman, that's where the deals get.
Sure, I would say, if you're going to be in person, this is where the magic happens, right? Even just running into somebody, getting a cup of coffee.
Well, I'm going to give you a good example. Last night at dinner, I ran into generals, admirals. I ran into the speaker, the president of the Speaker of Assembly for Ireland, a member of the Parliament there. I ran into the former Prime Minister of England. All of these people I was able to then get on my show as a result of just talking to them. And then other CEOs, where imagine going through the gatekeeper on the email, LinkedIn, or what. It would drive you. It drives you nuts. As opposed to the need and the ability to touch one and many.
It speeds up that communication, and also, when you come to events like this or any business conference, if you're simply attending the session, you can do that at home on YouTube.
Correct.
And so, what is the magic, or what is the extra thing that you can only do in person? And I think you should focus on, we should all focus on the unique things that we can only gather or benefit from in-person experiences. I agree with you.
Yeah. And some of that even in the sessions are good because it gives you a moment to put away the email, put away the phones, and just concentrate. And also take in the energy of the room, which is important. I mean, your own conference that SHRM has every year, there's a need for 125, 150,000 people to show up. Why? Because the interaction, that communion, the tribe of being together. It's a lot of energy that goes around with that. And I think very, very important. And by the way, CEOs, CMOs, CFOs, chief marketing, we all feel the same way. I know that some of the best things that ever happened in my career was when I was with other Fortune 100 CMOs and trading secrets and talking about things that we're not going to, get on the one-on-one side.
Sure, agree. Jeff Hayzlett, CEO and founder of the C-Suite Network. Thank you so much for making time for this conversation.
Thank you.
And best of luck to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're so glad to have you on the C-Suite Radio, C-Suite TV network as well.
Thank you. That'll do it for this week's episode. If you are interested in learning more about communication ways and learning more about the C-Suite Network, please do check out the show notes below, and we'll see you next time on Tomorrowist. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcast. We also publish a weekly newsletter with in-depth articles and the latest SHRM research to help keep you in the know about the trends shaping the future of work. You can subscribe and find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/Tomorrowist. Thanks for listening. And remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have to be a futurist, be a tomorrowist.
The future of work is shaped by the talent you hire today. Join us in Dallas, Texas, April 19th until the 22nd, to gain the tools and strategies to build a stronger, more resilient workforce at SHRM Talent 2026. Learn more at shrm.org/talent26-podcast.
SHRM.